Ladies and gentlemen, your sweet Zionist prince, white colonizer, coming to you live from the United States of America. We're taking a look at a clip from Eric Weinstein on trigonometry about Israel. I'm Tall the Traveling Clat. Let's get into it.
I don't believe that this is an occupied people. I don't believe that the Arabs are under occupation. And that's going to sound crazy because you're not exposed to any perspective that sounds like that. So how could you ever come to that conclusion? You have groups of people who are offered a state who we are not listening to. They do not want the state that they are offered. They are offered a choice between a state and a chant. And if you know the chant, it's from the river to the sea. From the river to the sea is what they chose. You could have a state or you could have a chant. And they want the chant. They are the tip of the spear in the global battle against Western hegemony, against an occupying European power in holy Arab land. And they're not going to give up on that as a collective political entity.
Correct.
For a relatively modest, prosperous state trading with the occupier, with joint economics, joint fate. That's very troubling to us because we have this idea of why wouldn't you want a state? You could have a state, you could be prosperous, you could send your kids to Purdue, And that's not easy for us. This is basically, if you think about motherhood, you don't think about Munchausen by proxy, right? Now, what do you do when you have a mother who comes to the hospital with a child who's continuously getting sick, and getting harmed? You have to ask, well, is it possible that the mother is harming the child? So you're about to see tiny children pulled out of rubble in northern Gaza. You're going to see it ad nauseum. You're going to see people rushing to the hospital. You're going to see mothers wailing. So we can talk about the whole thing about the martyrdom and how everybody prays that their family will be martyred. And you know what? Sometimes it's true. Sometimes you see on camera somebody saying, thank God they took my son, blah, blah, blah. But those are actually much more complicated things. Sometimes you turn the camera off and the person is crying because they know what they're supposed to say and they know what they're actually feeling. So my problem with this is that this is so much more complicated than the discussion we're pre-programmed to have that is guaranteed to fail. The richness of this problem, where Hamas is effectively the mother in a Munchausen by proxy situation, right? And the children, you're damn straight you're going to be pulling babies out of that rubble because that's what Hamas wants. And Israel cannot figure out how to extricate herself from this dance of death. So what I'm trying to say is you don't get out of this. You have a very unconventional foe in Hamas and in totalitarian Islam and in jihad and in ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And for some reason, mainstream media refuses to show us the images that they showed us during the Vietnam War through mainstream outlets. If you saw what I've seen, if you watched the Hamas videos, the ISIS videos, if you read Dabiq, if you did any of this stuff, you'd be sick to your stomach. You'd be a changed person.
I got to pause Eric, by the way. I have immense respect for Eric. I have for years. I know he can be controversial, but I really, really love listening to the guy. I actually used to listen to his podcasts a while before I did any political stuff when I used to travel around the world. I used to listen to this guy. I used to fall asleep to the sound of his voice. This right here tells me everything. Look at his body language. Look how he looks down. This is the same way that I react.
If you watched the Hamas videos, the ISIS videos, if you read Dabiq, if you get out of that rubble, because
that is the same way.
If you watched,
look at that,
the Hamas videos, the ISIS videos,
look at his face.
If you read Dabiq, if you did any of this stuff,
that way he just reacted, I know everything he's seeing. I don't even need him to describe it. I know exactly what he's talking about. I go through that frequently when talking about this. I know exactly what he's going through. I understand what he's seeing in his eyes when he's closing his eyes. I see what he's imagining. And it really makes you stop. Because it's not kids being pulled out of rubble. It's not airstrikes on Gaza. It's something else. It's something demonic. It's something from hell. We've seen it. I know what it looks like. I don't wish it upon any of you if you haven't seen it. I know that many of you watching probably have. For those of you guys who haven't, save your eyeballs from it. But it's a kind of trauma, and he's Jewish, so he understands this firsthand. It's a kind of trauma that's reserved for Jewish people because the acts of hell were reserved for Jews and anybody who happened to be around them that day who was unfortunate enough.
You'd be sick to your stomach. You'd be a changed person. And we don't have that. I remember that the night my parents turned off the TV during the Vietnam War. So one of my earliest memories. I believe it was GI's heads on pikes carried by the Viet Cong. You're watching American severed heads on sticks. If you think about all the Pulitzer Prize-winning photographs from the Vietnam era, right? You're watching a monk burned to death. You're watching a street execution, right to the head. You're watching naked children with their clothes burned off from napalm. You didn't see Falling Man. The most famous picture from 9/11 was basically not shown in the United States. There is this layer that is determined to push a fiction to us, which is a transparent fiction about the general nature of Islam. Islam is complicated. You have to study it. There are multiple schools of thought beyond Shia versus Sunni versus Ahmadi. You could just in Sunni Islam, different schools of jurisprudence, which lead to totally radically different outcomes between the Salafists and the Hanafi adherents. And what we've done is we've come up with this childlike concept of an oppressed people and a religion of peace, and all of this stuff is unworkable. And it's all mind control and it's all propaganda. And what my feeling is, and again, is I don't want to start the conversation from where I think you guys want to start it from. I want to start from the fact that none of us are prepared to have this conversation because we haven't been exposed to it. We don't know what the real issues are. And if we take the terms that are handed to us, if we have the best and most intellectual conversation, it will still be completely morally deranged.
Yeah, let me just disagree with the general thrust of what you said there.
Eric Weinstein, we have watched hundreds of clips now on this channel. We've reacted to hundreds of things. We've gotten millions of views. That was the best, by far, the best analysis I've seen of the situation up until this point. I'm marking this down right now. March 21st, 2025. Eric Weinstein, from his mouth directly in my brain. That was the most eloquently put, the most captivating, and the most honest assessment of the situation, the Israel-Palestine conflict, I've ever heard. That was incredible. That was a 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. I don't even feel like I have anything else I could add. Truly, that's amazing. If he could have taken everything, all my thoughts in my head, and put them into one explanation, that was it. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I'm kind of at a loss for words. Thank you guys for watching my video. I appreciate you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, Klats. I love you long time. If you believe in my content and want to support me, just know your help is needed. There's a bunch of great ways to support me, being PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, or joining my Patreon community down below. Patreon is the best way to support my channel, and you'll get a bunch of cool perks depending on what tier you join. Another great way to support me is by buying my merchandise on thetravelingclat.com. I regularly drop new merch designs like this beautiful hat or this amazing shirt, where you can support the channel and get something cool for yourself. I also have an amazing Discord community with people from all over the world. Thank you so much for your support.